one of the greatest concepts of all time, is also the most mysterious. Discovery of this idea transforms life, heals the body, and unites the divided. Religions believe in it. Atheists attack it. And people everywhere, regardless of their stance, think about it. Is it possible to prove the existence of God? What is proof? How does it work? And what can it teach us about ourselves? All this and more in today's episode of Into the Storm. Welcome back to Into the Storm. I'm your host, Justin Deschamps. I'm happy to let you know we're returning to the original format you know and love. In this season, we'll conclude the ultimate plan of the Draco series. Fear not, because despite appearances, amazing things are happening behind the scenes. You're not going to want to miss the climax of this series. In the first 3 episodes of this season, we're going to discuss what might be one of the most important topics of all time. Is there a God? Can we prove to a certain degree that God exists? The answer to this question is supremely dangerous to the powers that be, and supremely empowering to those of us who seek for freedom, fulfillment, and prosperity. We'll be answering the question about the existence of God, the divine nature of the universe, and the incredible purpose of life and all things. To do this, we need to answer fundamental questions like, what is proof in the first place? Why have the atheists seemingly been able to debunk the concept of God? And how can we be certain about the proof we come up with? We'll also discuss why believing in God and seeking to find Him is one of the most powerful ways we as individuals can find meaning, heal the soul from existential angst and suffering, and make the world and our lives better. What is proof? What is God? Can we prove something to someone who refuses to be open-minded? As you might imagine, this topic is one that could take up years of study, analysis, and exploration. Given this, you should know up front there's no way I can cover everything that there is to say on this topic. I'm going to focus on the information that deals with the core questions and addresses the errors in thinking of both mainstream religions and atheistic science. I will draw from religious writings when required, but for the most part, this won't be a proof of God based on any one religion or sacred writing. Now, the reason why is that the Bible, Quran, and Torah, along with other spiritual works, are essentially material that assumes as a given that God exists. They don't provide philosophic or scientific arguments for the existence of God. That is, they don't prove to their followers that God exists. As a matter of fact, a lot of religions contend you can't prove that God exists at all, and that to even know God is impossible. But I don't agree with these claims for the most part. However, I do agree that the truth about God, the whole truth about God, is infinite, and therefore, obviously, I can't possibly cover everything there is to say. We're dealing with a finite mind in a finite amount of time here. That being said, we can come to know God in small steps. And these steps are not only personal, or what in psychology we call subjective, they are also general, or what we know in modern science as scientific. Please don't assume because in this presentation I've left out information about your specific chosen writing, or religious context, or religious information that you find really important, that I've somehow missed the mark, or I haven't included that in my thinking process. I did consider almost all the information within a lot of the spiritual and religious writings and information that you might have heard of. Religions like Christianity, Islam, or Judaism, as well as Vedism and Hinduism, to name a few, are doctrinal and dogmatic in their literary substance. What I mean here is that the core writings of these religions list various maxims, axioms, and beliefs about God, stories, and so on, but they don't spend time proving to you or anyone else why you should believe in God. They simply require that you do believe in the dogma. They basically assume that you already believe in God, that you've already accepted the fact, given your own process, that there is a God and the concept of God is something that you should accept and consider as valid. And therefore, they focus their efforts on talking about what God is, what God does, and what God wants us to do. We're going to answer the question, why should you believe in God? What's the argument for the fact the God concept is useful and actually helps us understand reality in all the various forms that we encounter? We're going to explore why the God concept is useful for us and why it's been associated to the concept of salvation and what that even means. We're told that the truth about the divine is capable of expanding our vision, enriching our insights, enhancing our understanding, and refining our values. We're told that it heals the body, balances and transforms emotions, and ignites the soul. We're told it gives us new eyes to see, ears to hear, and hands to feel and create with. That if we accept that God exists, it imparts life everlasting. But is this really true? Let me just share personally that in my past, I rejected the concept of God. I was an atheist. It's because I never really encountered any good answers for the questions I had about why the God concept itself is something that's true. But later in life, I questioned my atheism, and I decided to see if there was any truth to the idea of God, using my scientific training to do so. What I discovered was that there is a scientific answer. Despite what scientific atheism claims, science eventually led me to the idea of God as the best explanation for everything we see in reality. And it's my hope that I can show this to you in this series. This is going to be the prequel to the final episodes of the Ultimate Plan of the Draco series. What is proof? What does it mean to prove something? Can the technique of proof override free will? Can proof force people to believe things they don't understand? Can proof work on somebody who's closed-minded, or has already decided what something is without actually looking? That's called prejudgment, by the way. The mainstream definition of proof is evidence or argument establishing or helping to establish a fact or the truth of a statement. In a sense, there are two types of proof: personal proof and general proof. Personal proof is the idea that I can claim something exists, and then I can show you evidence that makes you believe in the claim. If I tell you that my name is Justin, and I show you my driver's license, that might make you believe that my name is in fact Justin. Now, general proof is a little different. It's kind of like the bigger version of that. It's the idea that I can claim something exists, and it's already been worked out by experts who say that it is indeed true. Therefore, you should believe it. General proof is like a peer pressure technique. That is, since you want to be included in the group that believes in what the experts say, you better believe it, even if you don't understand why at a personal level. This is called an authoritative argument, or an argument from authority. For instance, if I say the speed of light is 186,000 miles per second, and I say that the proof for this is the official opinion of MIT or some other authoritative body of scientists and experts, then I'm appealing to their authority in my effort to convince you. Since proof is making people believe that a claim is true, and each person has a different standard about what makes something true, also known as a basis of belief, then this presents a challenge. How do you prove anything in a general sense? Is there really a way to make everyone believe that God exists with one magic bullet argument or a series of arguments? The answer is no. And the reason why is because the question assumes that we can force people to believe something, which we can't actually do. Since everyone has a different set of rules for why they believe something, there is no perfect, all-consuming proof that can be provided about anything. Ultimately, whether or not someone believes something depends on their choice. Conceptual prejudice is the idea a person has already decided that something is true or untrue without actually being open-minded to looking at the evidence, argument, or claim. I'll give you a spoiler here and say that both mainstream science and major religions are guilty of conceptual prejudice. When we say we can prove or disprove something, we're saying that there's a way to convince someone to accept a proposed statement of truth. As living creatures, we believe in things because we think it's useful in some way. One of the biggest reasons we form beliefs is because it has a social value. It helps us fit in. Psychologically, we need information to navigate life. In this sense, we can think of information as the metaphysical substance that keeps us alive. We need information because we need to understand how reality works to survive and thrive. We need to use words. When we use words like fulfilling and meaningful, we're talking about the sense-making effect that information and beliefs have on us. As we'll explore later, the history of the concept of God and science is our attempt to explain what we see in nature and in reality. It's an attempt to find meaning. Finding meaning also helps balance our emotions and reduces anxiety, stress, and helps us guard against mental illness. As a matter of fact, all mental illness at some level is often an inability to accept the truth about reality, or to believe in lies and personal delusions that literally drive you insane. So meaning, beliefs, and proof, our ability to really understand and know the truth, is extremely important. As I said, it's a kind of metaphysical necessity of life. The ability to form true knowledge and have true information in mind in your belief system is literally a survival and a thriving trait. Now that we've established that proof is the process of convincing someone of something, we can dig deeper into how proof works. As you might have guessed, this is really useful to know because most of our lives we're dealing with the question and challenge of how do we get people to believe things that we believe. You might say, as a truth seeker, you've discovered things that you think are important and you want other people to know about them. For example, if you discovered a pole shift was going to happen, you probably want to tell them about it in a way that they believe you. If you discovered that a certain spice, like turmeric, could be used to extend life and prevent disease, you'd probably want your loved ones to believe you. Thus, understanding how to share information with others to ensure they have the best chance to accept and believe it is extremely important and useful. Another word for the power of proof is persuasion. Let's talk about the two types of proof again, dialing into why they work the way they do. Personal proof relies on your ability to understand how a claim or statement properly explains something in reality. For instance, if we lived together and you had half a pizza in the refrigerator and you noticed it was gone, you'd ask me as your roommate what happened to it. Now, if I told you that a unicorn ate the pizza, you'd probably tell me I was lying. You would reject my explanation. But why would you do this? The reason why is that my explanation doesn't make sense. It's illogical in that unicorns don't exist. Therefore, there must be another explanation, a true explanation. Let's say that after you called me out on my lie, I told you that I actually ate the pizza last night after you went to bed. You'd probably accept this explanation. In your mind, this explanation would be the truth, or you'd categorize it as something that is true. What we just described is a scenario in which you use your understanding of reality to assess if my explanation is logical and makes sense. What we mean by make sense and logical is that the explanation about reality actually matches reality. The two things look alike. Personal proof uses the mechanisms of logic and validity of an explanation, where you as an individual carefully consider the argument to see if it makes sense. As you might have guessed, there are a lot of things that people believe that don't really make logical sense. Somehow people can believe all sorts of things that aren't really true. How is that possible? The short answer is that at a certain level, even though there's a real objective logic to determining whether or not something is true, by that I mean there is a right way to discern, part of your mind doesn't really care. At the end of the day, as long as an explanation feels right, then that's all that's required from most of us most of the time. A basis of belief or a standard of proof are two phrases that describe why people believe what they believe. As I'm sure you'll agree, people are sometimes gullible or skeptical. A gullible person believes almost anything, even if a statement doesn't make any sense. When you compare the statement to reality, there's no connection. A skeptical person doesn't believe most things, even if there is a valid reason to do so. Most people don't know why they believe what they do. They don't know the technique of using logic, evidence, and analysis to look step by step to check to see if an explanation of reality fits the reality being investigated. An emotional basis of belief is when people believe what they do based on feelings and emotions. Emotions, in this sense, are a type of information processing. When we ask the question, "Is this true?" we're asking an information processing question that says, can you compare the explanation against the situation at hand to see if our explanation fits? Now, the part of us that processes this information is the emotional part. The midbrain possesses systems that can quickly intake information from the senses and give you a readout or report of the information in the form of a feeling. Animals use information and feelings to make decisions. As humans, we have that animal processing power too. Using the unicorn example, let's say that you used your gut to determine if I was lying or not. What happens is that your midbrain intakes the information of my explanation about the unicorn and cross-references it against your personal database of memory, using a part of your brain called the hippocampus, which is in charge of memory recall. Your brain then transfers the explanation and your memories about my explanation, funneling up to the neocortex for processing. Your emotional readout compares the memories against the explanation, and if they don't match, then it produces an emotion that feels like a lie or an untruth. Your neocortex, which is the thinking and choice-making part of the brain, becomes active at that moment when you think to yourself, "It feels like this is a lie." At which point you invest yourself in that opinion of the situation and then use your speech to tell me I'm lying. Again, that was the process of forming an emotional basis of belief. Now let's talk about the logical one. A logical basis of belief uses all the same systems, except your thinking neocortex takes it an extra step further and assesses the logic of my statement, digging deeper by conducting an investigation about all the pieces that are at play. The end result is what's called a reason for why my statement is a lie. In this case, the reason is that there is no such thing as unicorns, therefore I must be lying. What I want you to walk away with here is that the basis of belief can either be emotional or logical. Both rely on memory, analysis, and comparison. Logical bases rely on your knowledge and ability to use that knowledge to analyze all the pieces within any given situation. As such, unless you're knowledgeable about the subject you're being asked to make a determination for, your emotional system will automatically kick in to give you an answer. So you can think about your emotions as kind of the backup processor. Unless you take the time to be like, wait, emotions, I need to think about this. And then you carefully start to go through the much longer process to look at all the information. Then your emotions will naturally give you an answer. Often what happens is that opinion that's contained within that emotional answer will now become your default answer, and then you will act as if that is true. So the emotional process is very quick and easy and automatic. Now that we know the two types of basis of belief, this gives us insight into why people can be led to believe in things that aren't true. Because A, our memories can be incomplete, B, our ability to use logic can be imperfect, and C, our emotions can be wrong or manipulated. Critical thinking is the technique of using logic and reason to dig deeper than what our emotions and our feelings automatically supply us. It requires that we make an extra step. It requires an act of will. Now ultimately, we'll be happy with any answer that feels right, even if it's not true. A subject like God is so massive, so complex, and requires so much knowledge about the universe and how it works, that most people don't make a logical assessment. They make an emotional one. This leads us to the discussion about general proof that we began earlier. And we can also call this a socially reinforced proof. Before we continue on, I want you to know that there's nothing wrong per se with an emotional basis for believing in God. It works well enough, and you can get a lot of benefits in your life this way. The problem is when we only use emotions as the basis, mainly because A, emotions are at best a rough readout or sketch of a complex picture, and B, they can be easily manipulated, which is what we're about to talk about. General proof, as we said, is the idea that a body of authoritative experts used their knowledge and logic to figure out if something is true. At least we hope. In the past, just like today, experts deceived people, which we used to call priests, and now we call politicians and scientists. Let's review again authoritative belief. For instance, the speed of light was worked out by physicists using scientific instruments, complex mathematics, and testing. If you believe the scientists, you trust that they figured it out correctly. And this is called an authoritative argument or basis of belief, as we said. Now, general proof or authoritative proof doesn't require you to know why it's true. You're only required to accept what other people say is true. It's blind belief, as we said, a form of socially reinforced belief. Social belief is an emotional basis of belief that works on your desire to fit in and avoid social isolation or ostracization. Authoritative proof is what religions use to make people accept the beliefs in the religion. And modern-day science, ironically enough, uses the same methodology. When people say, trust the science, they're essentially saying, don't you want to fit in? Don't you want to be included in the club of believers that trusts what the scientists say? Or more to the point, don't you want to avoid being called an idiot for not believing what other people do? The same methods are used in identity politics, advertising, and many other places in our society. Substitute the word scientists for priests. Peer-pressured general proof, or appeals to authority, are one and the same. Some religions use the threat of being thrown out of the church to make people believe in the doctrine. This was used a lot more in the past, but it's still used quite a bit today. In the scientific community, if you go against what the established doctrine is, then you will likely have your scientific credentials stripped away, and you'll be ostracized or removed from the scientific community. So literally, it's the same exact mechanisms. If you dare go against what the social group says, if you dare go against what the herd says, then you will be cast out of the flock. Cultural beliefs are very similar. Think about critical race theory, or so-called woke beliefs as a good example. Now, there's problems with socially authoritative beliefs, as you might have guessed. It has to do with the basis of belief. So why is it that people succumb to peer pressure? What's actually happening when we say something is socially reinforced? Social proof doesn't have to be logical or make sense. You often don't have to have a good reason based in logic and evidence to accept a belief for social reasons. As social creatures, we're hardwired to accept the beliefs of others to create a social connection. This is one of the primary ways that it actually happens. Social connection is the way we meet all of our body's biological survival needs. As we discussed in Season 4, the animal part of you has primitive thinking abilities that govern the social part of you. The social programming of your social brain, you might say. Here, your social brain doesn't need a logical reason to believe something. All it needs is an answer that feels good enough to be true, or more to the point, that makes you feel connected. It doesn't even have to feel true. As long as you feel connected, you will actually often override the feeling in your own mind that something isn't true, or the knowing that it isn't true, because you value social connection that much. That's how powerful socially reinforced beliefs are. This social part of you is highly susceptible to suggestion. It's used by advertisers to get you to accept something as the truth, often without your conscious mind even noticing what's going on. For the purpose of our discussion here, this means that if the basis of belief is social, then we're talking about an emotional basis. which basically says, does this feel good? Do I fit in? In this social sense, you believe what the authority says because the authority represents a kind of leader of the in-group or society in general. And since you want to fit in and you want to be accepted by everyone else, you'll feel a lot of emotional pressure to accept a social belief. Think about the power of the fear of missing out, also known as FOMO. If I told you that something amazing is going to happen next year, but you'll miss out if you don't sign up now, how does that make you feel? Would you say the fear of missing out is a powerful emotional motivator? What if I said the world is going through an incredible spiritual transformation, a rapture, and all the people who believe will ascend to heaven, where they will live forever in bliss, but all those people who don't believe will be cast into hell to suffer for all time? Does this statement capitalize on the fact you don't know what will happen when you die? And that since you're someone who wants to avoid pain, you might take a risk and believe in something you don't understand to avoid hell. You bet it does. What I just showed you is one of the oldest general authoritative proofs for believing in God. It works on the fact that, as living creatures, we want to avoid future pain, and that, given an uncertain situation, you'll believe what everyone else believes even if you don't know why. Even if you don't know it's true. Here's how the emotional part of a socially reinforced belief works. Because you want to avoid pain and suffering, you'll be motivated to avoid anything where the threat of pain and suffering is one of the options. As social creatures, our midbrain says that going against the crowd means isolation, loneliness, and therefore pain, suffering, and potential death. This means all general proof based on authority is based on a social dynamic that says if you don't accept what experts say, then you'll be an outcast, and therefore, your primitive midbrain almost automatically associates that proposition with pain, suffering, and isolation. Why would avoiding pain of isolation be a good thing? Because your brain is programmed to reward you for that. Anytime you avoid potential pain, you experience the pleasure of relief. Now think about a social situation when someone is telling you something that they believe is true, but you doubt it's true. Here's another example of why we believe things for social reasons. Because to confront another person about their beliefs is uncomfortable. How often do you go along with them knowing that if you were to be honest, it would cause social tension? Think about it. Every time you say something and you feel like somebody's doubting you, doesn't that make you really uncomfortable? In summary, personal and general proof both work on the basis of logic and emotion. Social situations pressure us to believe in things to avoid the emotional pain of confrontation and potential isolation that comes with not believing what everyone else believes. When it comes to believing in God, for most of human history, the reason why people believed in God was for social reasons. But there's another very important reason why believing in God is also at the heart of why people believe in scientific atheism. Despite the fact that social influence or wanting to fit in was a huge part of why people believed in God, there was always a logical basis alongside that. Remember that as people, we have a mind capable of comparing an explanation about reality to our own experience thereof. When these things don't match up, we refer to the explanation not making sense. And we can still be aware of this dynamic despite the fact we might believe in it for social reasons or emotional reasons. We've all had that experience of believing in something, of telling a white lie, for example, knowing that in our heart we don't actually believe it to be true. We often refer to this as wearing a mask. Humans have a mind that's different than our animal cousins. We want to understand and explain what we experience. We need an explanation that feels like the truth. This means humans are hardwired to seek for the truth. Now, this itself is a key piece of the argument for the existence of God, because of what has been called the God-shaped hole. Whether or not you believe in God, you will, without fail, need an explanation for God-like questions, such as, what created the universe? Where do we go when we die? And what is the ultimate meaning of life? Before we had science and scientific instruments to figure out why things happen, we used theistic explanations. We used God-based explanations. Here, we believed in gods of nature because they help explain what we experience in reality. When lightning strikes the ground, we naturally want to know why. Since humans know that we can do things in the world, it's logical to believe that perhaps a person-like being with amazing powers made lightning strike the ground. This is called anthropomorphism, or the tendency to explain things in the universe by applying a personal concept to them. For instance, a god of lightning, like Zeus, is the anthropomorphic personification of the force that makes lightning strike. The point is that it made sense. We had the ability to create explanations for nature in the form of gods that helped us understand what we experience. Since there was no other explanation, then it was reasonable and even logical to conclude all these gods of all sorts were at work. Now, as time went on, a god of gods concept began to form. The all-God, or the Father God concept, who created all gods. Then, the one true God concept emerged, which is to say that all of these other gods weren't actually gods at all, that there was only one God, the ultimate creator, a divine being. And this became the basis of monotheistic religions, like Judaism and later Christianity and Islam. Each of these theistic concepts has the power to explain everything humans thought about or experienced. Now, alongside people who believed in these theistic concepts, there were always people who were skeptical and thought that these explanations weren't good enough. It's this kind of rebel effect. Have you ever had an experience where you feel obligated to believe in something for social reasons? You're kind of rebelling against that. Now imagine in the past when these theistic concepts of God and explaining reality were everywhere. As a result, there was a kind of black market of skepticism. It was those types of people that decided to advance the atheistic concept, as we'll see. Now keep in mind that primitive man thought that literally everything was the handiwork of a godlike being. From the weather, loss of crops due to famine, or finding love in your life. But some people weren't satisfied with these explanations. These skeptics used their wits to work out that there were natural processes at work that could better explain things like the weather. Slowly, alongside religious growth and influence, philosophers and naturalists started to work out that a lot of things came to pass that weren't the direct handiwork of God. Men like Leonardo da Vinci, Archimedes, Plato, and René Descartes advanced the techniques of logic and reason that eventually gave birth to science as we know it today. The nuance here is that the general concept of God itself has a lot of merit, and a lot of the scientists throughout the ages believed in that. They just didn't necessarily believe in the version of God that would happen to be the dominant one at the time. Therefore, it's important to understand that when we discuss the concept of God, we're not talking about a singular concept. We're not saying the biblical version. We're not saying the Buddhist version. We're not saying the Judaic version. We're talking about a general kind of sketch or outline, and everybody has an opportunity to put their version of that in. And so the question becomes, what is the best version of the concept of God? And it should be noted that this battle of explanations about nature always helped advance the explanations on either side. You might say that better and better explanations of both theistic and atheistic concepts worked with each other hand in hand. I would argue this is no accident. It was actually great thinkers like Thomas Aquinas and Roger Bacon who helped advance the idea that God was not nature per se, but the laws of nature were God at work within nature. In this sense, natural law is God's persistent eternal will acting on the material universe across time. They used Aristotelian methods in an effort to try to figure out if you could use logic and reason to prove the doctrines of religious faith were working in nature. This eventually gave rise to naturalistic science, and much later, atheistic science used the framework of theistic science to declare God didn't exist. Isn't that ironic? And interestingly enough, atheistic science arose alongside the birth of Sabbateanism and later Marxism. Darwin, who was credited with forming the theory of evolution that modern-day people assert works against theism, was himself somebody who believed in God. In the 20th century, atheistic science overtook theistic science. Atheistic science is based on the idea that God doesn't exist, and everything we see in nature can be explained by natural processes. But as we'll discuss later, this is itself a kind of quasi-religious dogma. This progression shows us that the common thread that links scholasticism, or what we might think of as God-inspired theistic science, and atheistic science is the quest to try to explain nature. Was the universe and the laws that govern it created at the Big Bang? Or did God create the universe in a Big Bang? In the next episode, we'll consider the logic side of proof and how it relates to knowledge, which helps us understand how to discern and what's actually happening when we fact-check something. Then we'll be getting into the 7 proofs of divine existence and how this helps us know with great certainty why God exists. I'll leave you with these questions. What is the substance of thought? What are your beliefs made of? And how is our thinking similar to a sketch of reality itself?
What is truth? What is the power of an explanation? Why is the God concept better than atheistic nihilism? All this and more in the next episode of Into the Storm.